Hello, kind folks of the Arkham Sanitarium. Welcome to my channel, and today, or tonight, I'm going to be debunking this power scalers of Lovecraft fan. Now, I'm no scholar, I'm just a fan, and I gotta say that everything in this video is poorly researched and completely missed the mark. And please excuse my stuttering and awkward or shaky voice. This is my first video, and the first time I showed my voice on the web. But before I get into this, I have to make one thing clear. The Cthulhu Mythos was not meant to be power scaled. This isn't DC or Marvel. Every single Lovecraft fan knows this and hates the idea of power scaling the mythos because you're ignoring the whole point of it. To quote the Exploring series,
something that is occasionally debated in people interested in the Cthulhu Mythos is power level. That is, which entities in the mythos could defeat other ones. This discussion is common in almost every universe or piece of fiction, but it's often hand-waved during discussions of the mythos because A, there's just not enough evidence of ability or power to make a reasonable assumption, and B, the mythos isn't really meant to be dissected in that manner.
And with that out of the way, sit back, relax, grab your favorite fungus to snack on, and watch as I slowly lose my sanity.
Hey y'all, it's Webcam Parrot here to talk about one of my favourite verses, the Cthulhu Mythos. Now, I've been reading Lovecraft for a long time, to the point where I've read everything he ever wrote, including all of his letters, multiple times. And I think I have a pretty good understanding of the way that the verse works.
Reading all of his stories and letters? Damn, you must be loaded. As Lovecraft wrote over 1,000 letters, and it can set you back by hundreds. I honestly find it very hard to believe that anyone would spend hundreds of dollars on letters just to power scale some plot devices. And the majority of his letters are just Lovecraft conversing with his contemporaries and being racist.
Now, what I actually wanted to make, the video I actually wanted to make, was like a cosmology video where I explain the way that all the worlds and realms in the Cthulhu Mythos works and where various beings and things are and how powerful the verse is overall.
Now this is where you goofed up. The Cthulhu Mythos is not structured and wasn't intended to have a strict coherent theology or cosmology. Lovecraft never intended to be consistent. He intended it to be like a fictional mythology, and mythologies are almost never consistent. Lovecraft only wrote short stories and novellas for pulp fiction magazines, small circulating publication companies, and never intended or wanted stories to be analyzed or unnecessarily picked apart by a fan base or be used in shows or movies. He's not someone like Stephen King or some other contemporary writer today who has the need to make each of their stories interconnected with some strict canon. I mean, sure, he wasn't completely inconsistent, especially in his later stories, but this want to make every story that Lovecraft wrote to be this large cinematic universe completely misses the mark, considering that like 90% of what Lovecraft wrote are standalone stories with no connection to the mythos. In fact, I think he mostly ghostwrites and does poetry, the poor bastard. Lovecraft allowed others to write in his fiction or borrow elements from his fiction. If an author wanted to make a strict, coherent canon, then they wouldn't do what Lovecraft did. It's basic logic. In short, you lied. You don't know how this fiction works.
That's where I'm going to address what I think is a myth regarding Azathoth, where he is seen as the supreme, almost powerful being in the Cthulhu Mythos, or even sometimes as the creator of the whole mythos.
Well, because he is. And Yog-Sothoth being strong is the real myth.
I think this is incorrect, and that Yog-Sothoth and a number of other characters are vastly beyond him.
Well, you're wrong. Lovecraft wrote this letter right here that says that Azathoth is the father of all of the horrors and is coeval with the ultimate abyss. Well, it's been debunked. Good night, people. Wait, we're still not done yet. We have time.
Few people talk about everything in the Cthulhu Mythos being a part of his dream, and that the other gods need to play music to keep him sound asleep so that all of existence doesn't end. But this is simply never once shown to us in any of Lovecraft's writings.
Wrong. We saw him sleep in dream existence in Fungi from Yuggoth, a 38-sonnet poem that for some reason isn't in any Lovecraft story collection. The idea of Azathoth dreaming all of existence was an idea conceived by one of Lovecraft's friends and circle member, Henry Kuttner, in the 1939 story, Hydra, where it was stated that all things were created by the thoughts of Azathoth. I mean, yeah, sure, the story was published 2 years after Lovecraft died, but Lovecraft encouraged Kuttner to incorporate mythos elements into his stories, and the two shared notes together. So yeah, Lovecraft always intended Azathoth to be on top.
Randolph Carter is exploring the Dreamlands and is tricked by Nyarlathotep into heading towards the ultimate chaos where Azathoth resides. Despite having godlike power in the Dreamlands,
Where the hell did he get the claim that Carter has godlike powers in the Dreamlands? Because nowhere does any story state that, and that claim goes directly against Lovecraft's own views on humanity. Also, side note, you keep mispronouncing Nyarlathotep's name and irritates my soul.
this seems to be his actual deal. This is what Azathoth is actually about. He's not some sleeping dreamer. He's a horrible, mindless, inconceivable, and completely awake monster that lives in and is the very embodiment of ultimate chaos. That's why they call him things like the nuclear chaos, the blind idiot god, and the demon sultan.
So, chaos, in this context, isn't the modern-day definition of chaos. It's the Greek mythological definition of chaos, that being the primordial void or abyss that predates existence or created existence. That was seen in Greek mythology and Taoist theology. Taoism was even mentioned in The Whisperer in Darkness. This is taking consideration that Lovecraft admitted he was a Greek-Roman pagan in his youth, in his A Confession of Unfaith, and this is Lovecraft we're talking about. He is known for using old, archaic language, as well as being heavily inspired by Arthur Machen and a lot of things in his youth. The number one example is Abdul al-Hazred, which was originally a nickname Kid Lovecraft gave to himself because he loved the book Arabian Nights. But we all know that this nickname was recycled to become the author of the Kitab al-Azif, or the Necronomicon. And the reason why Azathoth is called the blind idiot god is because Lovecraft is also using the old Greek definition of idiot, that being an isolated man who is oblivious to politics. And why is he called the Demon Sultan? Well, simply because it's a simile, and Azathoth is demon to some, god to others. Lovecraft has called other creatures and entities demons before, despite not being demons like Yig and Cthulhu Mythos, who were both called the Devil God, despite the fact we know they're not devils. He only said this because it was a close approximation to the description or nature of the creature, and he just wanted to be flowery with his language.
This confusion seems to come from a comparison that was made between Azathoth and a creation of the writer Lord Dunsany called Mana Yod Sushai. Robert Price, who is a Lovecraft scholar, seems to think that Azathoth was inspired by this character. The one similarity between Azathoth and Mana Yod Sushai is that they both have music played to them. In the case of Mana Yod Sushai, it is to keep him asleep, but for Azathoth, it's just stated that this music lulls him and keeps him calmer.
Well, I rather trust the formerly respected scholar Robert M. Price than some power skiller on the internet, but hey, who am I to judge? Look, I can respect a fellow 21st century schizoid man. Just don't be surprised when people favor an academic scholar who has years of experience in dissecting the mythos and Lovecraft's works under his belt over some random internet guy. Trust me. And I gotta be honest, man, you sound very self-centered and narcissistic to consider your statements to be better than Price's regarding the mythos. Also, what you just described for Azathoth is literally putting someone to sleep, because lull means putting someone to sleep. I'm more shocked that a full-grown adult doesn't know what lull means. Oh, and another thing, I don't know who are these Lord Dunsany or Mana Yod Sushai, if you mean Lord Dunsany and Mana Yud Shushai.
He's a horrible monster that is an incarnation of pure chaos and would just destroy anything that came near him otherwise.
I'll say it again, the context is the old Greek definition of chaos, not the modern one. This should be common knowledge for a Lovecraft fan.
And not because he is dreaming everything.
Do I need to bring this up again?
It's also worth noting that Yog-Sothoth is never mentioned amongst the gods that play music to Azathoth, or that they even remotely live in the Lord of all things.
Well, you're wrong again. Yog-Sothoth is mentioned among the gods like Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep, Azathoth, etc., etc. Prime example is the Whisperer in Darkness and maybe the Haunter of the Dark. In no story were any names of the gods mentioned when addressing Azathoth and the whole playing flute bit. So that's why Yog-Sothoth was never mentioned, because none of the other gods were mentioned too. And going back to the Whisperer in Darkness, it says that these gods have the most hideous connections.
However, this comes from a pretty dubious source, that being merely a legend that Robert Blake remembers.
I don't know who is this Robert Blake, but I know who is Robert Blake. Anyway, Fuggy from Yuggoth also calls him the Lord of All. If you think the statement from the Haunter of the Dark is dubious, then technically all information regarding these entities are also dubious, as most of Lovecraft's stories are in the perspective of normal humans or academics that have doubts of their own sanity, or some of the events that happened. And some of it is in the perspective of crazed cultists or individuals who don't understand what's really going on, like the Cthulhu cultist and Starry Wisdom.
In the dreams of the Witch House, it's stated in the Necronomicon that Azathoth is the ruler of all time and space, which is probably what Robert Blake is referring to anyway. And in the Cthulhu Mythos, there are many, many realms completely beyond space and time. So this wouldn't make Azathoth the ruler of all that much, really, in the grand scope of things.
Considering the Migo are called the Outer Ones and originating from the Ultimate Void outside of space and time and worship Azathoth, they call him he in the Gulf, you probably shouldn't be so technical or literal with Necronomicon statements, especially in a very minor detail in a short story that has nothing to do with Azathoth. And again, this is Lovecraft we're talking about, and he loves purple prose and poetry. In fact, he wrote more poems than stories in his life. So it's safe to say to not take everything he wrote literally.
The last piece of evidence is this letter that Lovecraft sent to James Morton.
Remember this letter earlier? Huh?
Which includes a family tree that places Azathoth at the top of everything, including Yog-Sothoth. But it's worth mentioning that this is only found in a letter and was never actually published anywhere in a story, and also that Lovecraft is making a joke with his friend.
I think you shouldn't completely disregard this family tree, as although it is a joke, Lovecraft didn't take this stuff seriously, and has bits in it that are true, like Nugget being Shub-Nigroth's offspring.
Morton had been joking that he was fortunate to be a descendant of the Roman god Jupiter, and so Lovecraft responded that he, unfortunately, only has demons behind him, and that he is descended from the black crawling chaos, which is why he includes himself in this family tree.
Did you know that the Mythos has name-dropped circle members before?
The other problem here is that Lovecraft includes characters here like Tsathoggua, which is the creation of Clark Ashton Smith, who often wrote stories in the same universe as Lovecraft. But Smith has his own family tree for Tsathoggua that looks completely different and has no mention of Yog-Sothoth being related to him at all.
This is such an incredibly stupid point to make, as you treat Azathoth as Smith's creation, since you make it seem like Smith's family tree has more merit than Lovecraft's, simply because that he has his own spin on it. This argument can be applied to Lovecraft's family tree with no difference, except that you accept one interpretation over the other. If you didn't know, it was common for authors back in the day to borrow elements from each other and put their own spin on it. Lovecraft was no different and has borrowed elements from Robert W. Chambers and Ambrose Bierce, like Hastur and the Yellow Sign. So does Lovecraft write in the same universe that Chambers and Bierce made and want the mythos to be linked to their works? The answer is yes, if we follow this logic you brought up. Also, you say this family tree is invalid because that it was never published in any story, but yet you use and reference the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, which was an unpublished and unrefined story throughout Lovecraft's life. You know, for someone who claims to have read Lovecraft stories and letters for a long time, you seem to not know any or all historical or personal context behind these stories, even the basic one. In fact, Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, being an unpublished story, is literally in the first passage of Wikipedia. And it being unrefined really shows through how sloppy their ending was. So So a short bit of history to Power Scalers is that Lovecraft didn't single-handedly create cosmic horror. Instead, he was the one who refined the subgenre and perfected it. So although Lovecraft is the father of cosmic horror, Chambers, Poe, Dunsany, Mikan, Hodgson, and other muses are the grandfathers. In short, Lovecraft did not create it, he perfected it. I wanted to point this out because you make it seem like Lovecraft is the originator of this form of fiction and others wrote in it, when in reality, he was one of a handful of important literary figures in history that helped introduce and develop this form of fiction. It's similar to how Lord Byron is a master of writing romantic stories, but he wasn't the originator of the genre or movement, or even Byronic heroes. Oh yeah, funny thing is, when gathering evidence for this video, Lovecraft admitted that he actually got this stuff from Chambers and Bierce, and is now wrong to call his mythos the mythology of Hastur, or be part of the mythology of Hastur. So, that's just something.
However, the evidence for Yog-Sothoth being the supreme being in the mythos is far less slim and vastly more explicit.
No, not really at all, actually.
In Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, we see Randolph Carter travel extremely close to Azathoth, only just barely avoiding running into him by leaping into the abyss of the Dreamland and waking back up in New England.
Have you forgotten, or did you just skim through the final act? Carter managed to get there because of Nyarlathotep, and he was saved by Nodens and Savag. He didn't jump out of there and suddenly ended up back in New England.
However, at the start of Through the Gates of the Silver Key, a story that happens after Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, it's still stated that no man has ever reached the border of the Ultimate Gate, beyond which Yog-Sothoth lives since ancient times.
The passage you showed to prove your point that no man has been to the Ultimate Gate goes against your claims. It actually said that no man since the era of Shaddad has entered the borders of the Ultimate Gate. Aside from the obvious Arabian Nights reference, it actually shows that there were a few select who did reach the Ultimate Gate even before that. And if you were paying attention to the story, Yog-Sothoth said that 11 individuals from Earth have reached him before Carter, and 5 out of the 11 were human, or at least close to human. This implies that there have been entities that originate from other planets and dimensions that have reached Yog-Sothoth before. This is actually pretty interesting, as this could explain how the Yithians are able to mind swap across time and space, but alas, boring-minded people would choose this bonehead topic than something very interesting.
Not only that, but even going beyond the first gate was implied to be an experience that was completely baffling and on a new scale for Carter, again, despite already having travelled right up to Azathoth, only barely not reaching him.
Remember how I said that the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath was an unpublished story? So the reason why Carter hasn't experienced anything like Yog-Sothoth before is because technically, he didn't experience it yet. Due to the story where he was supposed to being unrevised and unpublished. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because it's like using the discarded draft of The Shadow over Innsmouth as having more merit than the actual finished story.
Not just this, but the gates themselves, which vastly transcend the worlds below them, are stated in the Dunwich horror to merely be one part of Yog-Sothoth's existence, with this quote saying that Yog-Sothoth knows the gate, Yog-Sothoth is the gate, Yog-Sothoth is the key and guardian of the gate, past, present, future, all are one in Yog-Sothoth.
Are you forgetting you're reading Lovecraft? That description is obviously a metaphor. The gates are not literally Yog-Sothoth. That's a metaphor. The metaphor being that this ultimate secret is gate-kept from humanity, and the only way to access this is via Yog-Sothoth. Yog-Sothoth knows where the secret is, and he holds the secret like a gate. As to the whole past, present, future being all one of Yog-Sothoth, it's actually referring to how there is no past, present, or future. It all happens simultaneously, and there is no such thing as time. Which is stated here in Through the Gates of the Silver Key. Also, you bringing this up is very hypocritical of you, because this is from the Necronomicon. But yet, you consider this as valid while you consider Azathoth to be invalid, which is why? Why would you do that?
In Through the Gates of the Silver Key, we find out that all beings exist merely as an infinite slice or facet of another greater version of themselves known as their archetype that lives in the ultimate void.
Having read and paid close attention to Through the Gates of the Silver Key, it only states that inner worlds, dimension beings, and gods of men are part of the archetypes, and gods like Azathoth and Cthulhu are anything but those things.
For instance, Randolph Carter is merely one finite facet of an infinite being that is also another 8-year-old Randolph Carter facet, a Randolph Carter facet who is an alien from a previous universe living billions of years ago, the Randolph Carter facet that still remains in the trans-dimensional extension of the Earth beyond the first gate, and on and on and on.
This also just means that all versions of Carter exist simultaneously. As previously mentioned, there is no time. Everything exists all at once.
These archetypes then simultaneously have a similar relationship to the supreme archetype, also known as the All-in-One, Yog-Sothoth.
There is no evidence the archetypes are part of the supreme archetype. You just pull that out of nowhere. The reason why Yog-Sothoth is called the supreme archetype is because only Carter calls him that. And Carter is kind of a narcissistic prick, which was shown how he acts in The Unnameable and the Silver Key. Oh yeah, one thing to note is that the Silver Key and the parchments that it's attached to is written in Aurelian, the language that Cthulhu and his spawn speaks. And that parchment grants the Silver Key unlimited power. So what does that mean for Cthulhu according to you power scalers?
Perhaps, however, the most blatant proof of this kind of thing is in the same story, where it says, "It was an all-in-one and one in all of limitless being and self, not merely a thing of one space-time continuum, but allied to the ultimate animating essence of existence' whole unbounded sweep, the last utter sweep which has no confines, and which outreaches fancy and mathematics alike. It was perhaps that which certain secret cults of Earth has whispered of as Yog-Sothoth, and which has been a deity under other names. That which the crustaceans of Yuggoth worship as the Beyond One, and which the vaporous brains of the spiral nebulae know as an untranslatable sign. Yet, in a flash, the Carter facet realized how slight and fractional all of these conceptions are."
Okay, thanks for the narration, I guess. It could use some work though, I find your voice kinda meh. Ultimately, this doesn't prove anything that Yog-Sothoth is stronger than Azathoth, considering you never saw Azathoth. I mean, come on, this is just a description of what Yog-Sothoth looks like. Nothing more, nothing less. If mere descriptions of appearance determine power to you power scalers, then that means the Unnameable and the Color Out of Space are also very powerful. And if you say, well, Azathoth is bound to time and space or matter, he isn't. In Fungi from Yuggoth, again, and The Whisper in Darkness, he was ascribed to be beyond time, space, dimensions, matter, light, and angled space. I mean, come on. You debunked your very own claims the moment you read and showed this.
What we actually know about Azathoth is that he is that amorphous blight of nethermost confusion which blasphemes and bubbles at the center of all infinity, the boundless demon sultan Azathoth, whose name no lips dare speak aloud, and who gnaws hungrily in inconceivable unlighted chambers beyond time and space.
If you just take one glance at the passage you just showed, it says that Azathoth is outside of your universe. So really, Azathoth is not part of the supreme archetype. Also, Fungi from Yuggoth technically has more merits if we use your logic of dissecting the mythos, because unlike Dream Quest, Fungi from Yuggoth was published and properly refined, and Lovecraft loves poetry. In fact, it's possible that Fungi from Yuggoth is actually the refined version of Dream Quest.
This is a discovery that Randolph Carter makes after actually going to the ultimate void and receiving the ultimate mystery from the All-in-One. This isn't just a legend or myth about Yog-Sothoth, like the previous statements for Azathoth.
Yeah, but this property of Yog-Sothoth was also stated in Necronomicon, just like Azathoth's description. You know, I'm wondering which parts of the Necronomicon you consider as having merits and which ones do not.
This is something that Carter directly saw himself. So not only should Yog-Sothoth be beyond Azathoth, but all of these beings and archetypes living in the ultimate void should be too, and even they are only one part of what Yog, the all-in-one, represents.
This is complete, utter nonsense, considering the mountains of evidence that contradicts this insane claim. But then again, you have to be a little bit insane to enjoy Lovecraft's work. And as stated previously, there is absolutely no evidence that Azathoth, the rest of the gods, and the archetypes are part of the Supreme Archetype. That is complete nonsense. You made that up.
Within the Cthulhu Mythos, Yog-Sothoth literally is everything. And this starts to add up when you consider that Lovecraft's own preferred term for his verse was the Yog-Sothothery.
Okay, I keep making fun of this guy's pronunciation, but why do you pronounce Yog-Sothothery like that? This isn't a D&D session with your little deep on OC. Chill, dude. Alright, while it is true that Lovecraft did call the mythos Yog-Sothory, he also called it Cthulhuism, Cthulhu and his myth cycle, the Arkham cycle on rare occasions, and the previously stated mythology of Hastur. So, what does Cthulhu and Hastur mean then in this context? Well, it doesn't really matter in the end because Lovecraft called it Yog-Sothory as a joke. Where is the joke? Because it sounds funny, duh! And repeats after me. Only finite dimension beings that reside in inner worlds and dimensions are parts of the archetypes, okay? Okay!
I'll be working on a Cthulhu Mythos or Yog-Sothothery cosmology video where I'm going to go more in depth on what these characters are like and how strong they are and the sorts of things that they can do.
Like how I said at the beginning of the video, the mythos can't be power scaled, and it's not supposed to be power scaled, and it's not a straight canon. This isn't DC or Marvel, the MCU. And why do you care about being a Lovecraft Puritan? Because even Lovecraft didn't care about being a Lovecraft Puritan. Just why? Why are you like this? Please tell me. Phew, I don't know what came over me. So, we reached the end. And if you like this video, and you kind folks of the Arkham Sanitarium want an encore, I'd be happy to make more of different varieties. Maybe I'll do some song covers made by the HPL Historical Society, or make a comic, or debunk more power scalers. And parents, if you're still tuned in, no hate towards you. The reason why I made this video is because you're spreading misinformation and misrepresenting the mythos. Besides, you're free to make your own mythos story, as I see you're very driven and hearted when it comes to fiction. But anyway, good day, good night, and may Cthulhu bless you all.